Hi, second graders. Today we're going to read Chapter 4, Emergency Meeting. But yesterday, I thought that I was finished with Chapter 3 and I wasn't, so I have to do a little bit of Chapter 3 and then the rest of Chapter 4, okay? According to Mice Family Stories, a human called Farmer Lamont had lived in the house. When he and his family left, it is said to be many, many winters ago, the house started to collapse. The white walls turned to ash and the roof's middle dropped lower than the other end. Windows fell out, doors fell in, the farmer's cast-off boots and old furniture magazines crumbled. All in all, it was a perfect and safe home for Poppy's family. But as Poppy approached the house, she spied a small red flag hanging from one end of the roof. She stopped short. A red flag was her father's signal that the entire clan needed to gather for an emergency meeting. Poppy's first thought was that the news of Ragweed's death had already reached home. Then she realized how unlikely that was. Something else of grave importance must have occurred. Chapter 4, The Emergency Meeting. Poppy ran across the lopsided porch and into the parlor. The whole family had indeed gathered. Poppy's father, thimble on his head, was on his accustomed perch atop an old straw hat, already addressing the crowd. The moment Poppy entered the room, he saw her. "Ah, Poppy," he cried, "you're late, but at least you're here." All the mice, a sea of ears, eyes, pink noses, and whiskers, turned to look at her. "But where's Ragweed?" Longwort demanded. "Wasn't he with you? Do you think you'll have the common decency, not to mention courtesy, to consider joining us at this moment of crisis, or is he beyond all that?" With so many eyes fixed on her, Poppy could not speak. "Well, Poppy," Longwort asked, "do you know where your friend is?" Poppy stammered, "May I tell you after the meeting?" Longwort murmured, as well as "I suppose," and "thoughtless children," concluding with, "just take your place, please." Poppy slipped forward and crouched next down to Basil, her favorite younger cousin. "Where you guys been?" Basil whispered. "Out," Poppy replied weakly. "You don't look so good. What happened to your nose?" "I can't explain now." "And where is Ragweed?" "Later," Poppy insisted. Basil gave his cousin a questioning look, but he held his tongue. Longwort, leaning over the crown of his farmer's hat, tapped his thimble cap and held up a paw to command silence. "For Poppy's sake, I will review what has happened already. Our family has grown very large, so large, in fact, there's not enough food in this neighborhood to feed us all. Indeed, our family is still an expanding one," he nodded to sweet Cicely, who smiled wanly in dutiful recognition of the remark. "For example," Longwort continued, "my wife and I have had 75 children, who in turn have given us 40 grandchildren, 28 great-grandchildren, and 12 great-great-grandchildren." This remark was greeted by the assembled mice with a generous tapping of tails on the floor. Longwort dipped his head in acknowledgement of the tribute. Then he went on. "The truth is, by my calculations, our current rate of population growth, and it's the, I was about to say when Poppy arrived, promises serious food shortages, sickness, and yes, death, unless we take action within the next few days." There was an immediate buzz and squeak among the family. "Good grief! How awful! What do we do now? Who would have guessed?" Longwort raised his voice over the hubbub. "Living in the open will not do. The dangers of that are obvious. No, we need to establish an extra residence, a home near an abundant food, but still close enough to Grey House, so the family, with its present leadership, can be maintained. And, of course, the second dwelling must be safe. Happily, I've been informed by an old sparrow acquaintance of mine, Mr. Abacolis, that a new home has been built within the territory." Again there was chatter. "Where? Have you seen it? What's it like?" "It's on the northern side of Dimwin Forest. New House, it's called. A half-day's trek from here." "That's so far! I'm now almost another country. I've never been away from here. I bet it's not so good as this place." Longwort held up his paw. The talk stilled. "This new house is reachable by the tar road across the bridge and beyond the new field, which I've been informed has abundant food." "Someone else can go. Wonder what kind of food there is. I doubt I'll do well there." "Naturally, I'll need to investigate the new house with care. Would I get a room of my own? Can I stop sharing with Tansy? They'll never let me go. I won't bunk with Husk. Further, there will be much organizing and packing to be done. I hate the thought of packing. I have too much to move. I just put together a whole new room." Finally, Longwort went on, "We will need a delegation to go through the formality of applying to Mr. Ocox for permission to move." This time, Longwort's words brought silence. Every eye looked down or away, except for Poppy's. She could only stare at her father in revulsion. How could he even suggest such a thing? Now, Lungwort said severely. Mr. Okots has always been most accommodating. Need I remind you that he protects us from porcupines? We all know about porcupines, don't we? We do indeed. We haven't seen so much one as one porcupine in these parts for years. Not one. Proof that Mr. Okox is holding up his end of the bargain. As long as I'm head of this family, I expect us to do our part. Asking his permission to move is an insignificant sacrifice to make for our well-being. All right, then, Lingwort concluded, looking around. Any questions? Poppy had no idea what Ragweed would have asked, but she knew it would have been something. Here he is standing on the hat. Good, Lungwort said. I thank you for your attention. Go about your business. I will keep you informed as always. Poppy, be so good as to remain. I'd like a private word. With so much chatter, the mice scurried off until only Poppy, her parents, and Basil remained. Now can you tell me what's going on? Basil asked. You're really looking bad. Poppy, trying to find the words to tell her parents about Ragweed, had closed her eyes. Basil tugged at her. Poppy, did something happen to Ragweed? Poppy gave a quick nod. What? Poppy! Her father called from across the parlor. I'm waiting! Poppy opened her eyes and turned to Basil. Stay close, she said to him. I'm going to need you. Slowly, Poppy crept toward her parents. Basil trailed behind. As his daughter approached, Lungwort drew himself up with a show of dignity. Well, Poppy, he said, I suppose I should be grateful that you managed to find time for a family meeting. Papa, Poppy began. You see, suddenly, Sweet Cicely asked, Poppy, what did you do to your nose? It's that we can deal with her nose later, Lungwort interrupted. What I wish to say first, Poppy, is this. As I made my announcement about the house, you did hear it, didn't you? Yes. When I mentioned making up a delegation to go to Mr. Ocock's, I was saddened that not one of your brethren or sisterin could look at me in the eye. It was as if they were fearful, but you, Poppy, you were steady on your mark. Your eye never wavered, straight and loyal, and I admire that in a young mouse. Therefore, I have selected you by way of a reward, and it is a grand one, isn't it, Mother? Sweet Cicely, brushing at her ears, smiled thinly. Right then, Lungwort continued, Poppy, I have selected you to go with me to see Mr. Ocock's. You what? Poppy cried. You know, it's an unlooked-for honor, but you heard me, right? You will join me when I go to Mr. Ocock's. But... Poppy tried to find words, but could not. But what? But Mr. Ocock's just ate Ragweed, Poppy blurted out. There was stunned silence. Ate Ragweed? Sweet Cicely finally gasped, her voice half gargle, half squeak. Did I hear you correctly? Trying to stop her tears, Poppy nodded. When? Lungwort demanded shrilly. How? Why didn't you tell me? I barely got back, Poppy sobbed, and when I walked into the meeting, I couldn't just say, pawing the tears from her face, she whispered, I couldn't. But to be eaten by Mr. Ocock, Lungwort sputtered, without even informing me. Sweet Cicely suddenly turned on her husband. Oh, stop that, she cried. We need to know what happened. Poppy, go on. Poppy, her heart heavy, stammered. That is, Ragweed and I, last night we went out to Bannock Hill. I mean, we had never before. It was such a beautiful summer night, and we thought it would be romantic. It was lovely, and he had just asked me. Poppy paused to look at her parents. Certainly would not be sympathetic. She decided to skip some parts of her story. Then Ragweed found a hazelnut, she went on. He loved nuts. So he started to eat it, and I told him that he should get under cover, and he wouldn't listen. And then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Mr. Ocock burst upon us. I hadn't heard a thing. He was just there. He almost got me, too, she added, pointing to her nose. But he caught Ragweed, she whispered. It was awful. Sweet Cicely hurried forward, gathered her daughter in a hug, and patted her back. A very uncomfortable Lungwort kept clearing his throat and fiddling with his whiskers. And then, Poppy went on, as she sufficiently was calmed, when I started to go back home, Mr. Ocock tried to catch me again, but I managed to escape. Lungwort shook his head. Poppy, he intoned, I'm bound to ask. Did you go through the proper formalities before going up the hill? Well, Come now, Lungwort cried, his agitation bursting out in anger. Did you or did you not ask Mr. Ocox for permission to go up there? Answer me! No, Poppy admitted. Well then, Lungwort said, if Ragweed's death can be an object lesson for the rest of the family, perhaps that's what happened will serve as a useful purpose. Good out of bad, so to speak. Ragweed isn't bad, Poppy objected. I never said he was bad. Without a doubt, his thinking was bad. He was a rude, thoughtless, headstrong mouse. Not one of ours, may I point out. Indeed, if your friend had followed the rules, if he would accepted things as they are, if he had listened to me, he would be with us today. Such a short, unhappy life, sweet Cicely sighed. I warned him, Poppy, Lungwort declared. I did. Let no mouth say otherwise. Though he was no son of mine, I did my duty by him. But he would not pay heed. There should be a lesson learned from this. Poppy tried to protest. But Ragweed and I... Again, Lungwort interrupted. Poppy, two things. First, I want you to go among the rest of your family and explain what happened to your unfortunate friend. Be so kind as to point out the cause, that you did not ask for permission from Mr. Ocox. I desire no such tragedies to befallen one of us. Is that understood? Yes, sir. Second, what I said stands about your coming with me when I request permission from Mr. Ocox to move. Let's hope your presence will convince him that, one, you are truly apologetic for what you have done, and two, in the future you will ask for his permission before venturing anywhere. So saying, Lungwort, with one paw about sweet Cicely, went off, leaving Poppy and Basil alone. Poppy looked after them for such a long time that Basil reached out and touched her. Poppy, he asked, are you all right? Basil, Poppy said with a mix of sadness and anger. Ragweed wasn't unhappy or bad. He wasn't. Maybe he was cocky at times, but I loved him for it. I did. Once again, tears trickled down her face. Poppy, Basil asked, are you really going to go to Mr. Ocox? I don't think I have much choice, do I? Only I do wonder what'll happen when he recognizes me. Her cousin's eyes grew wide. Think he will? Poppy pointed to the scratch on her nose. How can he miss? He put it there.